Thanks, Steve. Good morning, guys. So I get to come up here and yell and prognosticate about whatever I want, which is fun. In the last few weeks, I've been having a lot of conversations with people in positions of innovation in large companies. Almost every one of them expresses an incredible frustration at their inability to do things over again. If you look at the average lifespan of a company on Standard & Poor's 500 list, back in the 1950s, it was around 57 years. You were basically going to be on Standard & Poor's 500 list for roughly a human lifespan. As you can see from this chart, by today that number is down to around 13 years. Your continued success as a large organization is dramatically reduced. Big companies are getting disrupted and are getting killed much more quickly than they ever used to. That's no longer the span of a lifetime, let alone a career. That's the span of 10 years. One of the reasons for this is that traditional barriers to entry have vanished. Many of these large companies stayed where they were because they had things that made it hard for others to compete with them. In this case, cloud computing, on-demand technologies, and some of the stuff Robin was talking about yesterday, the ability to pay for something as you go rather than having to have the capital to get started, changes the landscape of what it takes to introduce a new business or technology or service. Mark Andreessen has famously remarked that software eats everything. And what he means by this is that everywhere we look, processes are being replaced by digital. The digital channel between you and the consumer is the default channel. I mean, once upon a time we talked about the web channel. That's just how people get stuff today. We've moved beyond the world where this is an exception to where digital front end between you and your consumer is the norm. Best Buy, or as I like to call it, the Amazon showroom, is a great example of what happens when digital channels replace traditional channels. But it's worse than that. Imagine going back 20 years and trying to do competitive research on one of your competitors. That seems almost impossible. If I said to you, go find out everything you can about your biggest competitor without using the internet. We just sit here and wonder, how do people ever got away with this stuff? Like, how do we ever do our jobs? It's sort of unthinkable. Today, if I want to know what someone's up to or what a competitor does or something, I just go Google it. It's trivial. Everything's online. Everything's digital. And so the coefficient of friction for things like retail distribution or testing out a new market or finding out about a competitor is vanishingly small. And any infrastructure a company might have built to do that stuff and keep out competitors is pretty much gone. But it's not just the front office. The connection between you and your suppliers is changing dramatically too. The back office is quickly becoming instrumented with sensors, APIs, automated processes. You may have seen a lot of videos of Google Glass and a lot of hipsters skydiving and taking pictures of their friends and so on. I don't actually think that Glass is a killer app for hipsters. I actually think the killer app for augmented reality like Glass is blue-collar work. Imagine, if you will, you're a blue-collar worker. You're down a maintenance duct, you've got your glasses on, and they're showing you which pipe goes to which house or which wire to cut. Here's a more concrete example. Imagine you're someone doing building. So you're sitting there hammering 2x4s and framing up walls with a 3D projected map of the blueprint of the house in front of you. As you're hammering and moving things around, it's counting how many nails you put in. It's making sure that they're properly positioned. Later on, the contractor can come back and see if you did a good job. The structural engineer can come back and see if the nails were placed properly. 3 years later, the homeowner can throw on a pair of glasses and know where to hang a picture and find a stud without one of those annoying stud finder things. So that's the kind of killer app that really changes an industry. But it also has some frightening effects for the back office, because in industry after industry, we are replacing humans with robots and with automation. Not the general purpose robots that you see on the Jetsons, but very special purpose robots. And the benefits of those technologies are unthinkably strong. Boeing recently replaced 4 workers with a robot arm that can paint an airplane wing in 24 minutes. It used to take 4.5 hours. And in doing so, it puts 70 pounds less paint on the wing. That means that's an extra passenger per plane. Light passenger, but still a passenger, per plane, just by using a robot. It's not that this is a general purpose robot. This is a very specialized robot. But in a world where technology is vanishingly cheap, it's easy to conceive of a special purpose robot for hammering 2x4s. And that means that as you record how people put 2x4s down and how they hammer them in, and you know the dropping cost of robots, you can see this tipping point when it's time to replace that human with a robot. Oh, by the way, the thing you use to train the robot is all the work the human did that was recorded by the augmented reality. So that's just one example of how quickly things are changing on the backside. So everything in front of a business and everything behind a business is being replaced by technology. And it's not just blue-collar work. IBM earlier this year announced that Watson, which 2 years ago was comparable to a two-year medical student, can now diagnose cancer better than doctors. So it's lots of things, not just blue-collar work. Now, one of the reasons that startups are able to change what they do so quickly is they generally act like they have nothing to lose. And big companies have a hard time keeping up because they can't act that way. They can't make big bets and moonshots. They have a lot to lose. And yet I think this is the really important thing. Big companies have everything to lose. If you look at the rankings on the Standard & Poor's 500 I showed earlier, the drop in lifespan from 50 years to 15 years is staggering. And so these companies have everything to lose. I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of big company executives, and the question I always ask them is, why isn't Blockbuster Netflix? I mean, think about this. Netflix was a startup searching for a new business model. If you believe Steve Blank's definition, Steve Blank is the godfather of the whole lean startup movement. A startup is an organization designed to search for a sustainable, repeatable business model. It's searching. It's not about executing on that model. It's about finding the model. A company, on the other hand, is an organization designed to perpetuate that business model. Think about a roulette wheel. Imagine you're playing roulette. It's a random game, and so you put coins down on certain numbers, and you see whether or not you win. Most big businesses, if they could, would come up with an elaborate plan to pick which numbers were likely to succeed. They'd make a few big bets on a few numbers and spin the wheel. But if you knew something about roulette, if you knew that each time you played, it would reveal something about the game, which numbers were more likely to come up, your strategy for playing would change dramatically. You'd bet on the smallest amount you could on each number, and you'd measure whether or not you'd done well, and then you'd adjust your bets. So I'd probably put like $1 on every number and see which ones did better, and then I'd put 2 on those and see which ones did better, and I'd iterate through it like that. And big companies are really bad at this, even though that's actually how today's business works. They tend to be risk-averse. They don't learn well from what worked and didn't. They tend to ignore new evidence because they're in the process of reinforcing business models, and they have a hard time changing their bets. That's not to say big companies don't have huge advantages. If you were the founder of Netflix circa mid-90s, no, early 2000s, you're probably sitting there going, this is a pretty daunting industry to take over because Blockbuster has a huge amount of market intelligence. They know everything every single person rented. They have a ton of inventory, not anymore, but they had a lot of inventory. And they had a lot of capital. I mean, GE today has $132.4 billion in short-term investments. Big companies have tremendous amount of capital. They also have actual customers. This is an example of DHL rolling out a last-mile package delivery company, technology where people can get someone else, crowdsourced, to deliver their package, their last mile. The thing about DHL is it can roll this out in Stockholm. If it works, they can flip a switch and roll it out worldwide to all their customers. That's something a startup doesn't have the luxury of. Notice I didn't say that big companies have existing IT infrastructure. That's not an asset. The biggest liability that big companies face today, and one of the reasons for their short lifespan on the S&P 500, is they're stuck with these legacy systems. So I'll tell you a couple of stories. Back in World War II, a lot of bombers came back looking like this. And so the US military was trying to figure out how to reduce and the British military as well, how to reduce the number of planes that didn't come back. So they look at these planes, and they draw diagrams to see where did the planes' bullet holes come back, because that's the place they want to put more armor on the planes. Turns out this is a horrible mistake. This guy basically said, look, I think we're doing this all wrong. We should put armor where there aren't any bullet holes, because the planes that got shot in those places didn't make it home. This is known as survivorship bias. It's a common cognitive bias where people don't think about the problem properly. We have a survivorship bias in IT. According to several studies, IT projects go horribly. Large IT projects run 45% over budget, 7% over time, give 56% less value than predicted. 17% of the time, those projects go so badly they threaten the company's existence. In a recent Standish Group study of 3,500 projects, over $10 million, really big ones, only 6.4% were considered successful. If you're wondering why you can't get on healthcare.gov, well, it probably had a significant challenge. And 41% of these are failures, abject failures. When we analyze the companies that are around today, we kind of have our own survivorship bias. We look at the successful projects and say, what are the things that were hard to do? Let's fix those. Well, you know what? We got through those. The projects that died a horrible death, we don't analyze in a disciplined way. We remember what was really hard about the projects that survived. It's not just that we're bad at analyzing technology success and failure. The rest of the boardroom is already waiting for this technology. Everyone in the company knows technology is essential. All of IT was predicated on the idea that technology was a scarce resource. Technology is the most abundant resource we have. What's scarce is things like attention and time to market and iteration and customer contact. The COO of a company is already streamlining the factory floor, getting ready for those robots, putting in sensors, using data and Kanban to optimize the processes. The chief marketing officer is already automating marketing, getting more and more precise and targeted. The CFO is already using big data to analyze risk and fraud and manage the treasury effectively. The CTO is already using technologies like cloud to spin up ideas and test them out and so on. The difference is that none of these people sees technology as their job. They have another job, innovation or marketing or finance. A CIO, and many people still do, see technology as their job. Technology is no longer an end. It's now a means to an end. These other people, these other executives, see it as a way to get their job done. These people tend to be really intolerant of delays. They don't want to wait around because they've seen just how quickly shadow IT or sort of rogue projects can get deployed versus the status quo in-house. They also know the real cost of technology is not the license, it's not the per seat cost, it's the integration with the company technically, it's the cultural adoption of the technology, it's how quickly you can change your bets, how quickly you can gravitate towards the places you're getting success. You remember that feeling you got when you went to school? First day of school, you had this brand new binder and you kind of cracked it open, you had these great pens, they were awesome. It was this purity and potential. I think that's what most of the rest of the company is feeling right now. They have that new binder feeling, all this cool technology that can change their lives. So I think the most important thought exercise for anyone in IT to really consider is this. Ask yourself, what would you do if you were starting from scratch? Would you go and invest in things that are no longer strategic, or would you invest in things that were going to change the business? When IT is abundant, where does your competitive advantage come from? Is it from owning hardware? Probably not. Or is it from not having to worry about that hardware? So I had a chance to talk with the head of innovation and customers for DHL, and he said to me, Alistair, you know what the biggest innovation in logistics has been in the last century? Does anybody know? Right, it's the large shipping container. And these things, by the way, the second largest he thinks was the right turn, because apparently if you only do right turns or prefer right turns in your mapping, you shave 20% off delivery times. But the shipping container transformed the technology, the shipping industry, logistics industry. It was a standard, it was portable across different stacks, quite literally stacks. See what I did there? It allowed us to move goods and technology and allowed us to innovate businesses on top of this building block. That standardization transformed the shipping industry. It even allowed us to do things like build hotels in Japan out of shipping containers. There's tons of ways the shipping container changed our lives. In the same way, you have to ask yourself, what's strategic? What things can I put into place that allow my business to compete on a strategic level, to make more bets, to learn from those bets, to iterate on them? Is it messaging and calendaring? Or should you probably use a SaaS suite for that? Is it hardware? Or should you probably use virtual machines, private cloud, software as a service for that? Is it backup hardware? Or is it better to just use a hosted storage system for that? In an era of abundant computing, IT is not strategic. What you do with it is strategic. I love this quote from Bruce Lee, "Empty your cup so that it may be filled. Become devoid to gain totality." I think IT needs to take a lesson from Bruce Lee right now. The cost of doing things the way you used to is going to get you kicked off whatever list of big businesses you're on today. If you're an IT professional, once you know what you would do if you were starting from scratch, if there were no constraints, I have a second really important question for you. Why aren't you doing it?